The wind came from the north, a high, thin scream that scoured the single street of the town. It was a place that felt temporary, a collection of gray wood buildings huddled together against the vast, empty plains of Wyoming territory. The sky was the color of old tin, and the wind carried the first hard grains of snow, sweeping the frozen mud of the street clean of any life. In a small room behind the saloon, Clara Jennings did not look up. Her world was the circle of yellow light cast by her kerosene lamp. In her hands lay a wedding dress, a cascade of white satin and seed pearls that belonged to another woman, a woman who would be celebrated. Clara's needle, quick and sure, moved through the delicate lace of the bodice, mending a tear near the seam. Her fingers ached from the cold that seeped through the thin walls. But more than that, they ached with exhaustion. It was a weariness that lived deep in her bones, a constant companion. Fear was the other. It lived in the hollow of her throat, tightening whenever the wind gusted, whenever a drunk shouted from the saloon next door, whenever a horse slowed its pace outside her window. She was a widow. The word itself was stark, a brand burned onto her skin. She was 22 years old. The whispers followed her like the prairie dust. She heard them when she dared go to the general store for thread or flour. "That's her, Mason Jennings' wife." The women would pull their skirts aside, their faces pinched with righteousness. The men would stare, their eyes a mixture of crude curiosity and cold judgment. Deserved what she got, tying herself to a man like that. She kept her head down, always. Her past was a ghost that owned this town. Her late husband, Mason, had possessed a smile that could charm a snake and a heart as cold as a revolver's steel. He had charmed her, right out of her father's failing ranch. He had promised her everything and given her nothing but his name, a name now synonymous with theft and death. Mason Jennings and his gang had ridden into Cheyenne, bold as brass, and tried to rob the cattleman's bank. It had gone wrong. A sheriff was dead. Mason was dead, shot in the back by one of his own men during the escape. The rest of the gang had scattered, and the money, a sum large enough to make men kill, was never found. The town, and the law, believed she knew where it was. They believed she had been complicit, a thief's wife, a murderer's widow. Mr. Hemlock, at the general store, would serve her last, his lips pressed into a thin line, counting her meager coins as if they were contaminated. Last Sunday, she had tried to attend church. She had stood on the steps, clutching her thin shawl, needing to hear a word of comfort, a word of God that was not condemnation. Reverend Pike had met her at the door, his large body blocking the entrance. He had not raised his voice. He had not needed to. "Your presence, Mrs. Jennings," he had said, his voice flat, "defiles this house. We are a community of decent folk. Do not return." She had turned and walked away, the silent stares of the congregation drilling into her back. So she stayed in her room, the only place that would have her. The saloon keeper, a pragmatic man named Silas, did not care about her soul. He only cared that her rent was paid on time, in cash. Sewing was the only skill she possessed. She mended shirts for cowboys, altered dresses for the saloon girls, and, in the cruelest irony, fixed the torn wedding dress of the banker's daughter. She kept her head down, and she survived. Tonight, the wind was worse. It no longer screamed. It roared. The snow was coming down thick now, a blinding white curtain that erased the world. The small room shuddered. The flame in her lamp guttered, casting wild shadows. Then, through the howl of the storm, came a sound that stopped her heart. Pounding. Not a knock, not a polite rap. A heavy, desperate fist striking her door, hard enough to rattle the frame. Clara froze. The needle slipped from her fingers, pricking her skin. A single drop of blood welled up, bright red against her pale knuckle. They found me. The thought was pure ice. Mason's men, come for the money she did not have. The pounding came again, heavier this time. "Hello, please, anyone inside?" It was a man's voice, deep but ripped raw by the wind. She crept toward the door, her stockinged feet silent on the cold floorboards. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely grasp the iron latch. She leaned forward, pressing her eye to the small peephole, but it was frosted over, blind. "Who is it?" Her voice was a dry whisper. "Need shelter," the voice shouted back, strained. "My horse, she went lame, snapped a leg in a drift. Please, the storm. I cannot last." She hesitated. Her mind screamed at her. "No, do not open it. Do not." Danger always came dressed as kindness. Mason had been kind. At first, he had bought her ribbons. He had told her she was beautiful. Then he had locked her in, and the bruises had started. Pounding. "Ma'am, please!" She looked back at her small hearth, the weak fire flickering. She looked at the snow driving against the window, a solid wall of white. Whatever this man was, the storm was worse. The storm was certain death. Her hand, moving against her own will, slid the chain back. It felt impossibly heavy. She turned the lock. She opened the door only a few inches. The wind tore it from her grasp, slamming it wide open against the interior wall. A blast of ice and snow exploded into the room, extinguishing the lamp instantly, plunging them into the near darkness of the firelight. A figure stumbled in, a large shape dark against the white chaos. He fell more than walked, collapsing to his knees on her floor, pulling the door shut behind him with the last of his strength. The latch clicked, and the roar of the wind was muffled, though not gone. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the man's ragged breathing and the hiss of the fire. He was covered in ice. His hat, his coat, his beard, all were caked in snow. He slowly, painfully, pulled his gloves off, his fingers raw. "Thank you," he gasped. The words choked. You saved my life." Clara backed away, clutching her shawl to her chest. She moved to the small table and struck a match, her hand trembling violently. The wick caught, and the lamp flared, pushing the shadows back. She saw him clearly now. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulder. Though gaunt in the face, his clothes were soaked through, dripping water and melted snow onto her floor. He looked up at her, and his eyes were dark, shadowed with exhaustion. But it was his neck that held her gaze, rising from the collar of his wet shirt, disappearing up into his hairline, was a scar. It was not the clean line of a knife fight. It was a thick, puckered groove, an angry, old burn that circled his throat, a mark left by a rope. He saw where she was looking. His hand rose instinctively to his neck, then dropped. He pushed himself to his feet, unsteady. "I mean you no harm, ma'am," he said. His voice was quiet now, rough. "You are bleeding," Clara said, noticing the dark stain spreading on his pant leg. He looked down. "My horse, when she fell, caught my leg under her. It is just a cut." "Stay by the fire," she commanded, her voice thin but finding a thread of strength. "You will catch your death." He nodded, too tired to argue. He limped to the hearth and crouched before it, holding his red-black hands out to the weak flames. Clara kept her distance. "I am Clara Jennings." The name hung in the small room. She watched his back, waiting for the recognition, the tensing of his shoulders, the shift from gratitude to suspicion. He only nodded. "Eli Ward." He offered nothing else. She studied him. He was a drifter, that was plain. His boots were worn near to breaking. His coat was wool, but thin. The violence marked on his neck spoke of a hard past, one that had nearly ended him. "Where are you headed?" she asked, needing to fill the silence. "West," he said, still staring into the fire. "Just passing through." It was the standard answer, the one that meant mind your business. The room grew tense. The small space, her only sanctuary, felt suffocating with him in it. He was a stranger, a man. and every man she had known since Mason had been a threat. Yet, he had not looked at her with hunger. He had not looked at her with judgment. He just looked tired. A deep, aching loneliness radiated from him, a silence that matched her own. It was a quiet recognition of pain, two broken things sitting in the same small, cold room. The storm worsened, a crack of thunder, rare and unsettling in a snowstorm, split the night. Clara flinched, a sharp, violent jerk of her whole body. A small cry escaped her lips before she could stop it. She pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with shame. Eli Ward turned his head. He watched her for a long moment. He did not speak, but his gaze was steady. He had seen her fear, the raw, animal terror that lived just beneath her skin. He turned back to the fire. Clara's heart was hammering against her ribs, but the panic began to subside, replaced by the familiar ache of her life. He was just a man, a cold, wet man. She moved to the small stove. "I have hot water. I can make tea. It is not much, but it is hot." "Thank you, ma'am." She prepared the tin mugs, her back to him. She could feel his presence, a weight in the room. When she turned to hand him the mug, her hand was trembling again. He stood to take it, and his fingers brushed hers. His skin was ice cold, but rough. He was careful not to let his gaze linger on her face, but he noted the tremor in her hand, the way she refused to meet his eyes. He drank the weak tea in 3 long swallows. "That is the best thing I have tasted in a month, Mrs. Jennings." "You should get out of those wet clothes," she said, her voice flat. "There is a blanket. You can sleep by the hearth. The floor is clean." "I have nothing to change into," he said. "You will freeze in those. Take them off. I will not look." She turned her back to him, facing the snow-lashed window, giving him the illusion of privacy in the tiny room. She heard the sound of wet fabric, the heavy squelch of his boots coming off. She heard him wring out his shirt. The silence stretched. "Ma'am." She turned. He had stripped to his thin long johns, which were also damp. He had wrapped the blanket she offered around his shoulders. He had laid his wet clothes as near to the fire as he dared. He looked thinner now, almost frail, despite his wide shoulders. The scar on his neck was fully visible, a brutal necklace. He did not apologize for his state. He did not ask for more. "The cut on your leg," she said. "It will keep." He laid himself down on the floorboards, curling onto his side, facing the fire, his back to her. He used his folded-up wet coat as a pillow. "Good night, Mrs. Jennings, and thank you." "Good night, Mr. Ward." Clara retreated to her own narrow cot on the other side of the room. She did not undress. She slid under her quilt, her boots still on. She could not, would not, be that vulnerable. The fire popped. The wind moaned, pressing against the small cabin. Outside, the snow was burying the world, burying the street, burying the town that hated her. She lay awake, listening to the 2 sounds in her room, the breathing of the storm and the slow, deep breathing of the stranger. She watched the snow drift outside, piling up against the glass. It looked soft, like the satin dress she had been mending. This man, Eli Ward, had fallen into her life like a stone dropped down a dark well. He was violence. He was quiet. He was a man running from something, just as she was. She stared at the dark shape of his back, the rise and fall of his shoulders under the thin blanket. She wondered, with a cold dread that felt terribly familiar, if this stranger, brought by the storm, would be her salvation or her ruin. The silence woke her. It was a quiet, so deep it felt heavy, a smothering weight of cotton. The wind had died. The constant, thin scream that had been the soundtrack to her life for 2 days was gone. Clara opened her eyes. The room was filled with a strange, pale, blue-gray light. It was morning, but the sun was not rising. It was diffusing. She turned her head, slowly. He was still there. Eli Ward lay on his side, his back to her, the thin blanket rising and falling with his steady breath. The fire in the hearth was nothing but gray ashes and a few winking orange embers. The room was freezing, colder than it had been in the night. She saw her own breath plume in the air. He had not murdered her in her sleep. He had not stolen her meager savings from the loose floorboard. Relief was so sudden and sharp, it felt like pain. She sat up, pulling her quilt around her shoulders, her feet hitting the icy floor. She was stiff, having slept in her clothes and boots. She looked at the window. The snow had stopped, but it had piled high, covering the bottom half of the glass, sealing her in. The light in the room was the sun reflecting off the immense, blinding white drifts outside. The town was buried. The entire world, it seemed, was buried. She looked at the man on her floor. He was a dark shape in the white room, a disruption. He stirred, groaning as he rolled onto his back. The scar on his neck was stark in the pale light. His eyes opened. They stared at each other across the small room. The morning light offered no comfort, only clarity. She saw the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the gray in his beard. He saw the undisguised fear in hers, the dark circles beneath them. He sat up, his joints popping in the cold silence. "Morning, ma'am," he rasped. "Mr. Ward," her voice was brittle. He looked at the window. "Seems the storm has passed." "Yes." "Seems we are not going anywhere soon." A new kind of panic, colder than the room, gripped her. The storm had been a reason, a finite event. This was different. This was being trapped. With him. He stood, painfully. His leg, she saw, was stiff. He limped to the small window, rubbing a clear patch on the frosted glass. He looked out for a long time. "Snow is high," he said, mostly to himself. "Drifts over the fences." He turned back to her. "I owe you for the night's shelter. My horse is gone. I have no money to offer." "You do not owe me," Clara said, standing up, wrapping the quilt tighter. It felt like armor. "A man pays his debts," he said, his voice flat, not unkind. He nodded toward the window. "I saw. The fence by your door is down. The one separating your room from the saloon alley. The snow probably knocked it over. When a path is cleared, I can fix it. It is not much, but it is work." Clara thought of that fence. It was a flimsy thing, barely a suggestion of privacy, but it was hers. It was the one thing that kept the drunks from the saloon from stumbling right up to her door. "It is not necessary," she said, her voice tight. "I disagree, ma'am." Eli said. He did not press the issue, but his tone suggested it was settled. She looked away, her jaw tight. To accept his help was to form a bond. To refuse was to be ungrateful, and perhaps foolish. The fence did need fixing. "As you wish, but there is no wood." "I will find some," he said. He moved to the hearth and began, with the patience of a man who had nowhere to be, to build a new fire. He took the smallest kindling, stacking it just so, before adding the few split logs left in her small box. He did not ask where she kept the matches. He used his own, striking one with his thumbnail. The first days were a lesson in quiet endurance. The town was paralyzed. No one moved. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional shout from the saloon as Silas, the owner, tried to dig his way out. Eli proved to be a man of few words and constant, slow movement. On the first day, he spent hours digging a narrow path from her door to the street, using the broken remains of a chair he found in the alley. He did not ask for her shovel. He seemed to know she would not have one. He disappeared for an hour and returned with 2 long, solid planks of wood, salvaged from a collapsed shed down the street. He did not say if he had asked permission to take them. Clara watched him from her window, her needle forgotten in her lap. He worked in the biting cold, his breath a white cloud. He moved with a limp, favoring his injured leg. But his motions were economical and strong. He was mending her fence. He was setting new posts in the frozen ground, a task that looked agonizing. He worked without stopping, his focus absolute. She was meant to be sewing. She had the banker's daughter's dress to finish. But she sat, and she watched. He was the first man in a very long time who had done something for her, without a hint of a ledger being kept, without a dark smile that promised a later payment. Mason had always kept score. "I bought you that fine dress. Clara, you owe me. Be a good wife." This man, Eli Ward, just worked. When the light began to fail, he came inside. He did not knock, but he hesitated at the door, as if remembering it was not his. He brought a blast of cold air with him. "It is done," he said. "It will hold." "Thank you," she whispered. They fell into a strange, strained routine. The storm had locked them together, and the rules of the outside world felt distant, suspended in the white, silent air. They shared cautious conversations. He did the talking, mostly. He spoke of ranch work, of breaking horses in Texas, of the way the land changed color in the high desert. He spoke of the war, not of battles, but of the mud, and the waiting, and the way it had changed men he knew. His voice was a low rumble in the small room, a sound that filled the emptiness. He never asked about her. He never asked, "Where is your husband?" He never asked, "Why do you live alone behind a saloon?" He never asked, "Why do the women of this town look at you like that?" His silence on her past was a gift, a space she had not realized she needed. It allowed her to breathe. She was, in his presence, simply Clara, not the widow, not the accomplice, just a woman in a cold room. But he watched. He was a man who had survived by noticing things. He noticed the way she worked, her fingers quick and sure, but her shoulders perpetually hunched, as if waiting for a blow. One afternoon, as she was kneading dough for a meager loaf of bread, she reached for the flour sack on the high shelf. Her sleeve slid back. On the pale, thin skin of her wrist was a cluster of old bruises, faded to a sickly yellow-green, the ghost of a grip, fingers pressed hard into her flesh. Clara saw him look. She snatched her hand back, pulling the sleeve down, her face burning with a shame so hot it brought tears to her eyes. She turned away from him, her back rigid. Eli said nothing. He simply took the flour sack down himself and placed it on the table. "Here," he said, and that was all. Another time, while she was sorting her sewing basket, he sat by the fire, mending the harness leather he wore under his coat. He looked up as she opened a small, carved wooden box. She took out a spool of black thread, and for a second, he saw what lay inside. A simple, heavy gold wedding band. She did not wear it. She kept it hidden, like a secret or a sin. He looked back down at the leather in his hands. He now understood the bruises. He understood the flinching at loud noises. He understood the lock on her door. And he understood, with a cold certainty, the pure animal terror he had seen in her eyes that first night. The snow began to melt. The world, slow and dripping, returned. The street became a river of mud and slush. The sound of wagons and distant hammering returned. Her sanctuary. The bubble of snow globe silence was broken. "We are out of flour," she said one morning, her voice tight. "And coffee." "I will go," Eli said. "No," she shook her head. "It is my room. I will go." She could not explain that his going for her would be an admission of something, a connection. It would be ceding her last piece of independence. You can carry it, if you would. But I will go." He nodded, pulling on his boots. "I will carry it." The walk to the general store was an ordeal. The mud was deep, sucking at her boots. But the mud was not the worst part. The town was alive, and the town was watching. Mrs. Hemlock, sweeping the boardwalk, stopped, her broom frozen, her mouth a thin line. Two cowboys, leaning against the land office, stopped talking. They watched Clara walk by, and then their gaze shifted to the tall, scarred man walking a half-step behind her. Their eyes were knowing and cruel. Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She had been the widow. Now, she was something else in their eyes, something worse. She pushed open the door to Hemlock's general store. The bell chimed, announcing them. The store was warm, smelling of cinnamon, dried apples, and tobacco, but the air was cold. Mr. Hemlock stood behind his counter. Reverend Pike's wife, a large woman in a black bombazine dress, was inspecting a bolt of calico. She looked up, her eyes fixed on Clara, then flicked to Eli. She sniffed, a small, sharp sound of disgust, and turned her back on them both. Clara kept her eyes on the floor. She approached the counter. Mr. Hemlock did not move. He continued to wipe down the wooden counter with a damp rag. His movements slow, deliberate. He did not look at her. Mr. Hemlock, Clara said, her voice barely audible. I need a sack of flour and a pound of coffee beans. Mr. Hemlock continued to wipe. He wiped a spot that was already clean. The silence in the store was deafening. Mr. Hemlock, he sighed, a long, put-upon sound. He finally raised his eyes. They were small and mean. We are out of flour, he said. Clara's eyes flicked to the barrels stacked against the far wall. They were clearly marked. Flour. Mr. Hemlock, I can see it. We, he said, leaning forward, his voice low and hard, are out of flour for you. Mrs. Jennings, this is a decent establishment. For decent folk, I will not have my customers disturbed by your presence. He glanced at Mrs. Pike, who nodded in stern approval. Clara flinched as if he had struck her. The shame was a physical blow. Stealing her breath, she could feel the blood draining from her face. She wanted to sink through the floorboards. And Hemlock continued, his gaze shifting to the man beside her. I will not serve a woman who brings company like that into this town. Before Clara could even think, Eli moved. He did not shout. He did not curse. He simply stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and the counter. He was much taller than Hemlock, and broader. He placed both of his scarred hands flat on the counter. He leaned in, just a little. He waited until Hemlock met his gaze. The lady, Eli said, his voice a low, quiet rumble, needs a sack of flour and a pound of coffee beans. Hemlock's bravado faltered. He was looking at the rope scar on Eli's neck. He was looking at the coldness in Eli's eyes, a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. I have the right to refuse, Hemlock stammered. And I have the right to ask again. Eli said. He did not move. His hands did not move. He just stood there. A mountain. A wall. Mrs. Pike made a sound of offense. Well, I never. Reverend Pike will hear of this, threatening a good man in his own establishment. Eli did not even look at her. His eyes remained locked on Hemlock. The storekeeper's face turned a dull red. He looked at Eli, at the floor, at Mrs. Pike, and back to Eli. He saw no way out. With a furious, huffing breath, Hemlock snatched a sack, shoveled coffee beans into it, and slammed it on the counter. He grabbed a 20-pound sack of flour and heaved it onto the floor. That will be $1.12, he spat. Eli reached into his own worn pocket. He pulled out a small leather pouch. Clara stared, mortified. He was paying for her. He dropped the coins, one by one, onto the counter. They rang with sharp clarity in the silent room. He hefted the flour sack to his shoulder as if it were weightless, tucked the coffee under his other arm, and looked at Clara. Ma'am, he said, nodding toward the door. Clara, her face burning, turned and fled the store. The bell chimed mockingly behind her. The walk back to her room was silent. Clara walked quickly, her head down, her body shaking. She did not know if she was shaking from anger, or shame, or something else entirely, something akin to a terrible, fragile gratitude. She unlocked her door and rushed inside, Eli following. He set the heavy sack by the stove. Clara leaned against the closed door, her eyes squeezed shut, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle. She was trying not to cry. She was failing. A single, hot tear escaped, tracking down her cold cheek. She wiped it away, furiously. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice choked. "I am sorry you had to see that you had to... "See what?" Eli said, his back to her as he stoked the fire. "See a small man act small? He does that. They all do." She was crying openly now, silent, shuddering sobs. "And you paid. I do not have. I cannot repay you." Eli turned. He stood, his full height seeming to fill the room. He looked at her, his face unreadable. "Mrs. Jennings," he said, and his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "You do not owe me for standing where I should." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, at the scars, at the exhaustion, at the quiet strength in his eyes, and for the first time since Mason had died, she did not feel entirely alone. The fragile safety between them deepened. It was no longer a truce with a stranger. It was an alliance. They began to eat dinner together. Before, he had taken his plate and eaten by the fire, and she at her small table. Now, she set two places at the table. It was a simple, domestic act, but it felt enormous. The silence between them changed. It was no longer the strained silence of suspicion, but the comfortable quiet of two people who understood loneliness. He would read from an old newspaper he had found, his voice low, telling her of events in Washington or happenings in California, places that felt as distant as the moon. She would sew by the lamplight, the quick, rhythmic sound of her needle a counterpoint to his voice. It was a fragile, strange piece, a mockery of a home, but it was more of a home than she had known in years. One night, the cold returned, sharper than before. A new frost crept up the windows. Clara sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a tin mug of weak tea, but she could not stop shivering. The fire was low, their woodpile nearly gone. Eli sat on the floor, oiling his boots, his face lit by the fire. "You are cold," he said. It was not a question. "I am fine." He knew she was lying. He could see the tremor in her hands. She looked at the floor, at her hands, at the fire. She was terrified of the night. Not of him, not anymore, but of the darkness, and the cold, and the memories that came when the lamp was out, when Mason's ghost felt closest. "Mr. Ward," she began, her voice so low he had to strain to hear it. "Eli," he said, not looking up from his boot. "Eli." The name felt strange on her tongue. "It is just the fire. It dies down in the night. The room gets so cold." She stopped. He waited. "I was wondering," she whispered, and the shame of asking, the sheer, naked vulnerability of it, made her skin crawl. If you would stay in the room tonight." She rushed to finish. Just for warmth, the fire, that is all." He stopped oiling the boot. He looked at her. He saw the lie. He saw the truth beneath it. He saw the desperate, aching loneliness in her eyes, an emptiness that mirrored his own. She was not asking for warmth from the fire. She was asking for a presence in the dark. She was asking for a guardian. He hesitated. To stay, truly stay, was to cross a line. He was a drifter. He did not get involved. He did not put down roots. not even for a night. That was how he survived. But he looked at her, at this woman who had been bruised and scorned, who offered him tea and mended his shirt, who had not flinched from his scars. He saw the loneliness that was about to break her, and it broke him. "I will stay," he said. He did not sleep by the hearth. He laid his blanket down on the floor, but this time he laid it by the door. A barrier, a guard. Clara got into her cot. She blew out the lamp. The room fell into darkness, lit only by the faint orange glow of the embers. She lay on her back, her eyes wide open. Staring at the ceiling, she could not see. She could hear him breathing. The sound was clear in the cold. Still room. He was 3 feet from her. He was a stranger. He was the only protector she had. The distance between her cot and his blankets on the floor felt heavier than touch. It was a canyon of unspoken pain, of fear, of things they would never say. But his breathing, a steady, living sound in the hostile dark, was a bridge. She was not alone. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a year, she slept without dreaming of Mason. Later, deep in the night, a sound woke them both. A knock. Not the desperate pounding of the storm, not the friendly rap of a neighbor. It was a single, sharp, hard knock at the door. Clara sat bolt upright, her heart leaping into her throat. In an instant, Eli was on his feet. He had not been as deeply asleep as she was. He moved with a silence that was terrifying. He did not reach for a lamp. He held the long, sharp knife he kept in his boot. He motioned for her to be silent. He crept to the door, pressing his eye to the peephole. Silence. The town was asleep. The moon was high, casting a cold blue light on the snow-covered street. There was no one there. Knock. Again. Harder. Eli's jaw was set. He glanced at Clara. Her face was a white mask of terror in the dark. He waited. He counted to 30, his breathing slow. Nothing. He slowly, carefully, slid the bolt back. He opened the door a single inch. Cold air, the empty street. The saloon was dark. No one. He opened the door wider, stepping half out onto the small porch, his knife hidden against his leg. "Who is there?" he called out, his voice low. Only the wind answered, stirring the snow. He closed the door. He slid the bolt. He pushed the chain into its slot. He turned and looked at Clara. "No one," he said. But he knelt by the door. He squinted at the threshold. There, just at the edge of the doorstep, protected from the wind by the small overhang, was something that had not been there when they returned from the store. A single, deep boot print. It was not his. It was not hers. Someone had stood right there, stood and watched, stood and knocked, and then they had walked away. Eli Ward stood up. He looked at Clara, who was clutching her quilt to her chest, shaking. He did not tell her what he saw. He did not need to. He looked at the locked door, his face grim. He knew that boot print. He had seen prints like it in the mud outside Cheyenne, long ago. He knew trouble was not coming. It was already here. The day after the boot print was a day of listening. Clara sat at her table, the wedding dress in her lap, but her needle was still. Every sound from the street, a wagon wheel groaning in the mud, a man's laugh from the saloon, a distant hammer, made her jump. The thin walls of her room, once a meager protection, now felt like parchment, offering no defense at all. Eli was restless. He was a caged animal. He had checked the door, tested the lock, and stared out the small, clean patch of the window so long that Clara thought he might wear a groove in the floor. The boot print in the snow had melted, but its ghost remained, a dark stain on the threshold of her mind. He could not sit. He could not whittle. He could not, it seemed, breathe the still air of the room. "I need wood," he said abruptly, his voice too loud in the quiet. Clara looked at her woodpile. It was low. True, but it would last another day. Eli." "It is low," he said, cutting her off. Not unkindly. He was already pulling on his coat. "And I need to see Silas. See if he needs any work, splitting logs, anything." She knew it was a lie. He was not going to ask for work. He was going on reconnaissance. He was going to put his ear to the ground and find out who had knocked on their door. He was going to find out if the trouble he smelled on the wind was real. "Be careful," she whispered, her throat tight. He nodded, his face grim. He paused at the door, his hand on the latch. "Keep this locked. Do not open it. Not for anyone." He slipped out. The sound of the bolt sliding home on her side was a metallic click of finality, of imprisonment. She was alone again, but the aloneness was different. Before Eli, it had been a familiar ache. Now, it was a sharp, focused terror. She was waiting. She tried to sew. Her hands shook. The tiny, perfect pearls on the bodice of the dress seemed to mock her. She was mending the symbol of a happy life, a life of protection and celebration, while her own was unraveling. She put the needle down. She began to pace. The room was 4 steps long, 3 steps wide. She paced it 100 times. She thought of the boot print. She thought of Mason. His men had been shadows in her life, loud, coarse men who drank his whiskey and laughed at his cruel jokes. She remembered their faces. Boone, with his dead eye. Lefebvre, the quiet one with the knife. She tried to remember the shape of their boots. An hour passed. It felt like a lifetime. The sun, weak as it was, crawled across the floor. When the knock came, she nearly screamed. It was not the single, hard knock of the night. It was a fast, solid rap. Thump, thump, thump. "Clara, it is me, Eli." Her hands fumbled with the bolt, her fingers clumsy with relief. She threw the door open. He stood there, his arms empty of wood. His face was granite. The cold had drawn all the color from his skin, leaving it a pale gray. And his eyes were dark, flat. He had heard. He stepped inside, pushing the door shut, and slid the bolt himself. "What?" she asked, her voice a dry reed. "What is it? You heard them." "I did not hear them," he said. He took off his hat, turning it over and over in his scarred hands. He would not meet her eyes. "I heard of them." He walked to the hearth, stared into the low flames. "A rider came in this morning, from the south, rode a horse hard, put it up at the livery." "Go on," she breathed. "He was at the saloon. Silas was talking. The man was asking questions." Eli finally looked at her. He was asking about Mason Jennings. He was asking if his widow was still in town. The floor seemed to fall away. Clara grabbed the back of her chair to keep from collapsing. The pearls on the wedding dress blurred. "They are here," she whispered. "Oh, God, they are here." "One man, just one, for now. A scout, maybe." "You must leave," she said, the words rushing out. She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into the rough wool of his coat. "Eli, you must go, now. You do not understand. These men, they are not like Hemlock. They are not like the men who, they are killers. They will kill you just for being here." "Clara." "No, you must listen!" She was panicked, her voice rising to a thin wail. "You think I am just a widow. You think the town hates me because of who I married. It is not just that. It is the money." He went very still. "What money?" "The robbery," she choked out, the story she had held in her chest for a year finally tearing its way out. "The one in Cheyenne, the one where the sheriff was killed. Mason and his gang. They got away with it. They got the money. A lot of it. From the cattleman's bank." She let go of him, pacing again, wringing her hands, her knuckles white. They were supposed to meet to split it, but Mason, he was shot. He died before he could tell them where he hid it. And now they think I know. She stopped, her back to him. "They think he told me The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by her ragged breathing. "Did he?" Eli's voice was quiet, flat, unreadable. Clara spun around, her eyes flashing with a sudden, hot anger that burned through her fear. "No, he told me nothing," she cried. "Do you think he trusted me? He trusted no one. He thought I was stupid. He treated me. He hit me because the coffee was too cold. He would never, ever trust me with something that important. I am just the woman he owned." The anger collapsed, leaving her sobbing, empty. "I do not know where it is. I swear to you, Eli, I have never seen $1 of it. I have nothing. This room, this needle, this is all I have in the world." She looked at him, her face wet with tears, her body shaking. She expected the change, the shift in his eyes, the look of suspicion, the greed, or the cold calculations of a man cutting his losses. She expected him to turn, unbolt the door, and walk away. He had every right. It was not his fight. Eli Ward stood for a long time. He watched her. He saw the raw, desperate truth in her terror. He saw the bruises on her wrist, the faded yellow ghosts. He saw the wedding ring hidden in the wooden box. He saw the woman who had shared her last bit of tea with a half-frozen stranger. He nodded, once. "I believe you," he said. Clara stared, her sobs catching in her throat. He put his hat back on, his movements slow and deliberate. "You were right," he said. "I did not get wood." "Eli, where are you?" She thought, for one heart-stopping second, that he was leaving, that his words were a kindness before the abandonment. "I am going to the livery," he said, his voice hard. "I need a hammer. And nails. Good. Long nails. And I am going to see what spare lumber Silas has piled behind the saloon." Her mind could not follow. "Lumber for the fire." He was at the door. He turned, his hand on the bolt. "For the windows, Clara!" He slid the bolt back. "Keep this locked until you hear my knock. Do not open it." He was gone again. This time the waiting was different. It was not the stretched, thin terror of abandonment. It was a stunned, fragile confusion. He had believed her. He was not running. He was getting nails. When he returned, he was carrying 2 long, thick planks of rough-cut pine and a heavy carpenter's hammer. He dropped them on the floor with a thud that shook the room. "Silas owes me for fixing his stable door," Eli said, answering her unasked question. He did not wait for her permission. He went to the first window, the one that faced the street. He measured the plank against the frame. "It will cover most of it." "Eli, what are you doing?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. You cannot build a fortress." "I can build a warning," he said. He began to hammer. The sound was explosive in the small room. Bang, bang, bang. Each strike was a declaration. "I am here. We are waiting. We will not be easy." He was shutting out the world. He was sealing them in. He was not running. He boarded the main window, leaving a small gap at the top for air, but making it impossible for anyone to see in or climb through. He braced the back window, the one that faced the empty prairie. He renailed the latch on the door and used the leftover wood to wedge a heavy bar across its middle. The room grew dark, lit only by the weak light from the gaps and the flickering orange of the hearth. It was no longer a room. It was a box. It was a tomb. It was a sanctuary. When he was finished, he stood in the center of the room, breathing hard. He looked at Clara, who was huddled on her cot, watching him, her eyes wide in the gloom. "They will kill you," she whispered, the tears starting again. "All for me, a woman you do not even know. They will see those boards, and they will know you are here, and they will kill you." He ran a hand over his face, his beard rough. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear. He walked over to her. He did not touch her. He crouched down, so his face was level with hers. "Clara," he said, his voice low. "If they come, They will meet me first. The sun set. The darkness in the room became complete. Clara lit the lamp, her last one. The small, yellow flame pushed back against the shadows, but it felt weak. The shadows in the corners were deeper than before. They sat. The silence was heavier than the snow had been. They were trapped, not by weather, but by men. "You should have left me," Clara whispered into the quiet. "When you heard the rumors, you should have walked out that door and never looked back. Why did you not leave?" Eli stared at the floor. He picked up a small splinter of wood from his work and turned it over in his fingers. "Running," he said, his voice rough, "does not always work. Sometimes you run so far you forget what you were running from, and sometimes you find you have run right back to it." "What are you running from, Eli?" she asked. The question was soft, not an accusation, but a simple plea to understand. He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. He rubbed his thumb, slow and hard, over the rope scar on his neck. "A man," he said finally. "A group of men, down in Texas, near the Brazos." He told her in the simple, unadorned words of a man recounting a hailstorm or a drought. It was just something that had happened. He had been a ranch hand. He had been good at his job. There was another hand, a young man, almost a boy, named Isaac, a black man. He was good with the horses, Eli said, his voice flat. Better than any of us. Quiet kid, kept to himself. The foreman's paybox, holding a month's wages for the whole crew, went missing. "They blamed Isaac," Eli said, his voice devoid of emotion. "It was easy to blame him. He was the only one." "But he did not do it," Clara whispered. "No, I knew who did. The foreman's brother-in-law. A worthless man. Always drunk. Always owing money at cards. I saw him, leaving the foreman's office late the night before. I did not think anything of it, until the box was gone." Eli stopped. He squeezed the splinter of wood until it snapped. "I spoke up," he said. "The foreman called us all together. He had the rope out already. He was going to make an example of Isaac. I spoke up. I told him what I saw." You defended him?" "I stood where I should," Eli said, the words a hollow echo of what he had told her in the store. It did not matter. The truth did not matter. They did not want the truth. They wanted a reckoning. They were drunk. They were angry about the money. They turned on me, said I must have been in on it with him, said I was a liar, and worse. He touched his neck. "They got this far. They had me on my horse, the rope over a cottonwood branch. They were slapping the horse's rump." "Eli, stop." "The sheriff rode in. He cut me down." Eli tossed the broken splinter into the fire. For a second, I thought the law had arrived, but he was just one of them, only with a badge. He cut me down, but he let the others go. He looked at me, lying there on the ground, and he told me to ride north and not stop. He said the foreman's people were powerful, and they would not let it rest. He said they would finish the job, and he would not be able to stop it a second time, or he would not want to. "And Isaac?" Clara asked, her voice thick with tears. "The boy?" Eli looked into the fire. He was already gone. They had not waited for me. I was just the complication. He was quiet. So I ran. I ran from men who used the law to cover their own hate. I ran from being a man who spoke up and only made things worse. I have been running ever since." Clara was crying. Soft, silent tears that dried on her cold cheeks. She was not crying for herself. She was crying for the boy, Isaac. She was crying for this man, Eli, who had tried to do right and had been given a death sentence for it. He looked up, surprised to see her tears. "You are a good man, Eli Ward," she sobbed. "I am a man who failed," he said, his voice bitter. "I failed him?" "No." Clara moved from the cot. She knelt on the floor in front of him. "No, you are a man who tried. You stood You did not run when it mattered." She looked at him, at his scarred, tired face, at the pain in his eyes that was so old and deep it had become a part of him, and she understood. He was not looking at her as Mason's tainted widow. He was not looking at her as a sinner, or a whore, or a liar. He did not see the whispers, or the judgment, or the stain of her husband's crimes. He saw her, just Clara. He saw another person cornered by a world that was cruel and unjust. He saw someone else who was being punished for something that was not their fault. For the first time since her wedding day, Clara felt seen. The wind picked up outside, whistling through the gaps in the boards. A high, thin keen. A storm was returning. The world, it seemed, was not done with them. A low rumble of thunder, deep and distant, vibrated through the floor. Clara startled. It was a sharp, violent flinch, a reflex of old trauma, her hands flying up to cover her ears. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the crack, waiting for the blow. But the blow did not come. Instead, a hand covered hers. She opened her eyes. Eli had not moved, except to reach out. His hand was large, rough from work and rope, scarred and impossibly warm. He covered her hand, his thumb gently brushing her knuckles. It was a simple, quiet gesture. It was not a demand. It was an offering. She turned her hand over, lacing her small, trembling fingers with his. She gripped his hand. She held on as if it were the only solid thing in a world that was turning to dust and shadow. The barrier of fear, of propriety, of her past and his, it crumbled. She looked at him. The lamplight was low, turning his face into a landscape of shadow and soft, yellow light. All she could see was the kindness in his eyes. "If you stay tonight," she whispered, her voice shaking so badly she could barely form the words. "If you stay with me, I will be yours forever." It was not a bargain. It was a plea. It was a vow. It was the only thing she had left to give. It was her entire, broken, worthless self, offered up in the darkness. Eli looked at their joined hands. He looked at her face, tear-streaked and terrified and open. He saw the precipice they stood on. He knew what she was offering. She was offering him her past, her danger, her fear. She was offering him the end of his running. If he stayed, he was no longer a drifter. He was hers. He hesitated. He felt the weight of her words, the cost. He saw the faces of Boone and Lefebvre, men he had never met but knew. He saw the rope. Then, slowly, he stood, pulling her up with him. He did not answer her with words. He walked to the door, the one he had braced against the world. He reached up and, with a slow, deliberate scrape of metal, he shot the heavy iron bolt. He turned the key in the lock, the click sounding deafening in the small room. He walked to the window and gently pulled the thin, ragged curtain across the final gap, shutting out the last sliver of the hostile night. The room was lit only by the lamp, its flame burning low. He turned back to her. He walked to her, and she stood, trembling, waiting. He did not kiss her. He raised both of his scarred hands and cupped her face, his thumbs gently, so gently, wiping the tears from her cheeks. She leaned into his touch, a long, shuddering sigh escaping her, a breath she felt she had been holding for years. Their first embrace was not passion. It was solace. It was two broken, shipwrecked people finding a piece of solid ground in a raging sea. It was awkward, and trembling, and desperate. Clara pressed her face into the rough wool of his shirt, inhaling the scent of cold air and wood smoke and him. She wrapped her arms around his waist and held on. He rested his chin on the top of her head, his arms coming around her, holding her tight, holding her as if she were the last good thing in a world gone mad. Outside, the wind howled, a rising, mournful cry that sounded like a warning, and carried on it, faint but unmistakable, growing closer in the dark, was the dull, rhythmic echo of approaching riders. The first light was a pale, gray-blue, filtering not through a clear window, but through the thin curtain and the cracks in the boards Eli had nailed over the glass. It was a dim, watery light, but it was enough. Clara awoke slowly, piece by piece. The first sensation was warmth, a deep, solid warmth pressed against her back. An arm draped heavily, possessively, over her waist. She was on her cot, but she was not alone. The second sensation was the absence of fear. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she had not woken with a gasp, her heart hammering, her eyes flying to the locked door. She was safe. The word felt foreign, fragile. She lay perfectly still, breathing in the scent of him, wood smoke, sweat, and the faint, clean smell of the lye soap she kept. He was still asleep, his breathing a slow, deep rhythm against her shoulder blade. She had not slept in a man's arms since Mason, but this was nothing like that. Mason's sleep had been a drunkard's stupor, his touch heavy and careless, even in unconsciousness. This was different. Eli's arm held her as if he were guarding her, even in sleep, as if he had spent the night shielding her from the ghosts and the coming dawn. She remembered the night, the confessions, the desperation, the thunder, his hand covering hers. "If you stay tonight." He had stayed. He had bolted the door, and then he had come to her. It had not been a night of passion, but of solace, a quiet, desperate coming together, a confirmation that they were no longer two separate, broken people, but something else, a single, shared defense against the dark. She watched the dust motes dance in the thin shafts of light. A profound, aching tenderness filled her chest. It was a feeling so new, so terrifying in its intensity, that it almost felt like pain. This peace was real, but she knew, with a dreadful certainty, that it was fleeting. The boards on the window were a testament to that. He stirred behind her, his grip tightening for a second before he relaxed. He was waking. "Morning," he rasped, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," she whispered. She did not turn. She could not. Not yet. She was afraid that if she looked at him, the spell would break. "You are warm," he murmured, his breath brushing her ear. "You are." They lay in silence for another long minute. The sounds of the town waking up were muffled, distant. A horse whinnied. A door slammed. "Clara," he said, his voice clearer now. He sat up, and the cold air immediately rushed into the space where he had been. She felt the loss of his warmth instantly. She turned. He was sitting on the edge of the cot, his back to her, running his hands through his hair. His shirt was rumpled. The scar on his neck was stark in the gray light. "We cannot stay here," he said. He did not look at her. He looked at the boarded-up window. "I know." Her voice was a small sound. "This man, Boone, and his friends, they are not the kind to knock once and leave. That scout will have gone back. He will have told them. They will come." "I know." He stood, his joints popping in the cold, and pulled on his boots. He moved to the hearth, his limp more pronounced in the morning chill, and began to build the fire. "We have to leave. Today. Now." "Where?" she asked, sitting up, pulling the thin quilt around her shoulders. The room was freezing. He tossed a log onto the kindling. "Someplace far, someplace they will not think to look. Not south, not back toward Texas, not California. Too many men like them head there. North, maybe Oregon Territory. Or Washington. Big country. Empty country. A man and his wife." He paused, the words hanging in the air. "They can get lost there. Start over." A man and his wife. The word sent a jolt through her, a mixture of impossible hope and sharp fear. He was not just talking about saving her. He was talking about them. I have no money. Eli, nothing to buy passage, nothing for a wagon. I have a little, he said, turning to her. His face was set, grim, but his eyes were steady. Enough for a steak. Enough to get us a mule, supplies. Enough to get us to the next town, and the next. I can work. I can get ranch work. You can sew. We will make it. She looked at him. This drifter, this man marked by violence, who was offering to take on her past, her name, her danger. He was offering her a future, a thing she had not dared to dream of. She nodded, the movement sharp. Yes, all right, I will go. The fear was still there. It lived in her stomach, a cold, hard knot. But for the first time, it was not the only thing she felt. There was something else growing beside it, a fragile, trembling hope. Good, he said. Get dressed. We will pack what little we can. We will take only what we can carry. We will be gone before they even know we have moved. The act of packing was painfully quick. Her life fit into a single, small satchel. She packed her spare dress, her winter shawl, the few undergarments she owned. She packed her sewing box, the sharp needles and spools of thread. It was her only trade, her only worth. She paused, her hand hovering over the carved wooden box. She opened it. The gold band, mason's ring, lay there, dull in the lamplight. She picked it up. It felt heavy, cold. She walked to the hearth and, before she could think, before she could lose her nerve, she threw it into the hungry, rising flames. She did not watch it melt. Eli, watching her, nodded. Good, he said again, softer this time. She looked at the white wedding dress, the one she had been mending, still draped over her chair, a life of pearls and satin, a life that was not hers. What about this? Leave it, he said. It is not yours. It belongs to the past. He had his own meager bedroll, his spare shirt, his knife, his razor. He had a small pouch of coins, heavier than she expected. He had his revolver, which he checked, cleaning the cylinder, reloading it with fresh cartridges. The metallic click-click-click of the cylinder turning was the only sound in the room. He handed her a small skinning knife. I know you do not like them, he said, his voice flat, but you will keep this on your belt, always. Her hands shook as she took it. The handle was smooth bone. It was cold. They were almost ready. Eli was securing his bedroll. Clara was lacing her boots, her fingers fumbling with the knots. The room was tense, full of the silent urgency of their escape. We will go out the back, Eli said, his voice low. Through the alley. We will head for the livery. We will buy a mule, not a horse, less conspicuous. We will be on the north trail before full light. Clara stood, her satchel in her hand. She took a deep breath. She was ready. And then it came, a low, distant rumble. It was not thunder. It was rhythmic. It was growing. Eli froze. He held up a hand. Listen. She had already heard it, the sound she had been dreading, the sound of hoofbeats. Not one horse or two. It was the sound of many. A dozen, at least. They were not trotting. They were galloping. They were not passing by. They were coming here. Down, Eli hissed. He grabbed her arm, his fingers biting into her flesh. The thunder of the horses filled the street. It was a sound of absolute, conquering power. They stopped, abruptly, right outside her door, the horses snorting and stomping in the mud. In the cellar, Eli said, his voice a low, hard command. He ripped the small rag rug off the floorboards, revealing the square trapdoor. No, Clara whispered, her eyes wide with terror. No, Eli, I will not. You will! He did not shout, but his voice was a whip. He grabbed her, shaking her. Clara, listen to me. You will get in that cellar. You will stay there. You will not make a sound. You will not come out. No matter what you hear. Do you understand me? No matter what. Eli, they will kill you! She sobbed, clutching at his shirt. He put his hands on her face, his grip hard, forcing her to look at him. "They will kill me faster if I am worried about you. I can handle this. I promise. Now, go! For me, go!" He kissed her, a hard, fast, desperate press of his lips. It tasted of fear and gunpowder. Then he lifted the door. The black square gaped at her, smelling of damp earth and rot. He all but threw her in. "Pull it closed. Not all the way. Leave it a crack so you can breathe. But do not lock it." She stumbled down the 3 steps into the pitch black. She looked up. His face, pale and taut, filled the square of light. "I love you," she whispered, the words tearing from her. His face softened for 1/2 second. "I know. Now, be silent." He closed the door. Darkness. Absolute. She was buried alive. She crouched on the damp dirt, her hands over her mouth, tasting the grit on her palms. Above her, she heard his movements. The scrape of the heavy bar being lifted from the door. The sound of the bolt being slid back. A single, heavy, booted step. Then, a voice that was not Eli's. A voice that was loud, confident, and slick with a lazy cruelty. "Well, well, look what we got here, boys." Clara's blood ran cold. "Boone." She remembered that voice from Mason's drunken nights. "She ain't here," Eli's voice said. It was low, steady, a rock. A harsh laugh. "Ain't she? We'll see about that. Who in the hell are you, the new stud?" "I am the man telling you to ride on." "Are you now?" Boone's voice was closer. He must have been right on the porch. "Silas told us the little widow had a visitor, a drifter, scarred-up fella. Looks like he found you." There was a pause. Clara could hear the jingle of spurs, the creak of saddle leather. "I didn't think," Boone said, his voice dropping into a tone of mock pity, "that the widow would find another fool so quick. Mason, he wore her out, if you take my meaning. Guess she's still got some fight left in her." Clara squeezed her eyes shut, shame and rage a hot bile in her throat. "Get off this property," Eli said. His voice was flat, deathly. "Or what?" Boone laughed again. "You'll shoot us all? There's one of you. Drifter. I count 6 of us. One is all you need to worry about." "Is that right? We just want the money. Friend, Mason's stash. She tells us where it is. We'll be on our way. We might even leave you alive. Hell, you can have her. She's used goods, but maybe you like that." Clara heard Eli move, a shifting of weight on the floorboards just above her head. "She does not know," Eli said. "Liar." Boone spat. "She knows, and we'll get it out of her. We'll start with those pretty little fingers of hers, the ones she sews with. Lefebvre. Check the back." "Stay where you are," Eli commanded. "You're in no position to give orders, friend." It happened so fast. There was no more talking. There was a single shout, "Now!" And then the world exploded. The roar of gunfire in the small, enclosed space was deafening. It was not one shot, but a volley. Bang, 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 bang. It was a physical blow, a pressure in the air that Clara felt in her chest. Wood splintered. The boards Eli had nailed up shattered, ripped apart. Glass rained down. A man screamed, a high, thin sound of agony. Bang, a single shot, deeper than the others. Eli's revolver. Another scream, this one cut short. A heavy, wet thud as a body hit the floor, right above the cellar door. Clara screamed, her hand clamped over her mouth, the sound a muffled, animal noise. More shouting. "He got Lefebvre. The bastard shot Lefebvre. He's in the room! Light him up!" Another volley of shots tore through the thin walls. Bullets ripped through the floor. Dirt kicked up next to Clara's foot as a slug buried itself in the cellar wall. She curled into a tight ball, her head on her knees, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "He's hit! I seen him go down!" Boone's voice. "Let's go! Let's get him!" "No, wait," Boone shouted. "He's just one man. He's wounded. Lefebvre is dead. I'm not losing another man over this. Not in broad daylight." There was a pause, filled with ragged breathing and the distant, terrified shouts of the townspeople. "He ain't going nowhere." Boone's voice was cold, full of a new, patient malice. "He's trapped in there, and he's leaking. We'll be back. We'll be back by sundown. We'll get the horses out of the street, get a drink, and then we'll come back and we will burn that little shack to the ground. We'll see how fast he comes out then, and the widow with him." Clara heard them move, the creak of leather. "You hear me, Drifter? Sundown! You and the widow are going to burn." The sound of horses, moving away, this time at a walk. The thunder was gone. Silence. A terrible, ringing, absolute silence. All Clara could hear was the drip, drip, drip of something wet landing on the dirt floor of the cellar. "Eli?" she whispered. Silence. "Eli!" she screamed. A groan, a low, agonizing sound from directly above her. She pushed the trapdoor. It was heavy. The body of the man, Lefebvre, was lying partially across it. She pushed with all her strength, her shoulders burning. The body shifted with a sickening slide. She scrambled up into the room. It was destroyed. It was not her room anymore. It was a slaughterhouse. Gray daylight streamed in through a dozen new holes in the walls. The air was thick with the acrid, choking smell of black powder. Her furniture was splintered. The wedding dress was ripped to shreds. Lefebvre, a thin man with a knife scar on his cheek, lay in a pool of dark blood, his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. And Eli, he was slumped against the far wall, near the hearth. He had tried to make it to the door, or away from it. His revolver was on the floor, just out of his reach. His left hand was pressed hard against his right side, just under his ribs. His shirt was black with blood. His face was the color of old ashes. "Clara!" he gasped, his eyes fluttering open. You were supposed to stay." "Oh, God," she sobbed. She ran to him, stumbling over a broken chair. "Oh, Eli." She fell to her knees beside him. "You are hurt. You are hurt." He got me," Eli breathed. It is bad. We have to stop the bleeding. We have to." She looked around, frantic. The room offered nothing. She grabbed the hem of her own skirt, ripped a long, thick strip of cotton from her petticoat. "The cellar. We have to get you to the cellar. They are coming back. They said sundown." I cannot move. Clara, just leave me. Go. Out the back. Run. Run now." "No!" she screamed at him, her voice raw. "I am not leaving you. I am not leaving you." She put her arm around his back, trying to lift him. He was a dead weight. He cried out, a sharp sound of pure agony. "You have to help me," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face, blinding her. "Eli, please, help me. Stand. You have to stand." He looked at her, at the desperation in her eyes. He groaned, and with a strength she did not think he possessed, he pushed against the wall. He got one foot under him. She took his weight. He was impossibly heavy, leaning on her, his breathing a wet, ragged sound. "That's it," she grunted, sobbing. "That's it. One step." She dragged him. It was 2 steps, then 4. She stumbled, her legs buckling. He fell against her. They collapsed at the edge of the trapdoor. "I cannot, Eli, I cannot lift you. Just roll me in," he gasped. He half slid, half fell into the black hole, landing hard on the dirt floor with a sickening thud that stole his breath. Clara scrambled in after him, her hands sinking into the damp earth. She reached up, her arms aching, and grabbed the trapdoor. She pulled it down. Darkness. The darkness was complete, thick, smelling of mold and iron. The only sound was Eli's breathing. It was shallow, and there was a small, wet rattle to it. "Clara," he whispered. "I am here. I am right here." She fumbled in the dark, her hands finding his chest. She moved to his side. Her hands touched the wound. It was wet, sticky. He hissed in pain. I have to bind it," she said, her voice shaking so badly she could barely speak. She took the strip of her petticoat. "This will hurt." "Just do it." She pressed the wad of cotton against the wound. Hard. He arched off the floor, a muffled scream in his throat. She tied it, pulling the strip as tight as she could, her fingers clumsy, slick with his blood. He fell back, his breathing ragged. She sat in the dark, her back against the damp cellar wall, her body shaking in violent, uncontrollable tremors. "This is my fault," she whispered, the tears coming in a fresh, hot wave. "This is all my fault. Clara, stop." "No, it is. You came here. You were passing through. And I trapped you. I brought this to you. They shot you. You are going to die. All because of me." "Be quiet," he commanded, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through her hysteria. She stopped, her sobs catching. I am where I chose to be," he rasped, each word an effort. "I told you, I ran from Texas, I ran from everything. I was done running," he coughed, a wet, terrible sound. I would rather die here, in this hole, than leave you to them. Do you understand? I stood where I should, this time." His words silenced her, the simple, awful truth of them. This was his choice. This was his stand. She crawled to him in the dark, her hands finding his face. It was cold, clammy. "You are not going to die," she said, her voice fierce. She leaned down and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate, a furious, frantic press of her mouth to his, a kiss that tasted of blood and dirt and fear. She was trying to pour her own life into him, to hold him to the earth. "You cannot," she whispered, her lips brushing his. "You cannot leave me. I will not lose another man. I will not lose you. Eli, do you hear me?" He did not answer. He only squeezed her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. And then it went limp. For a terrible second, she thought he was gone, but then she heard it, the faint, shallow rattle of his breath. He was unconscious, or just resting. She sat, holding his hand, in the absolute, cold dark. There was nothing to do, nothing but wait. Wait for him to wake. Wait for him to die. Wait for sundown. Outside, above the ruined room, the wind began to howl. A low, mournful sound. It was the first breath of the returning storm. The chaos was closing in, sealing them in their grave, as the world outside prepared for the night. The darkness in the cellar was a living thing. It was cold, damp, and thick, pressing against Clara's skin. It smelled of turned earth, of potato rot, and of the sharp, metallic tang of Eli's blood. Time passed in heartbeats. Clara sat with her back against the crumbling dirt wall, her knees drawn to her chest, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, though she could not see them. Every breath she took was a small, pained shudder. Beside her, Eli was a presence of shallow, ragged breathing. He had not spoken since she kissed him. He had slipped back into that dark, gray space between life and death. She had his hand in hers. It was cold. She tried to warm it, rubbing it between her own. But her own skin was like ice. She had ripped her petticoat into bandages, packing the wound as best she could in the pitch black. But she knew it was not enough. The bleeding had slowed, or at least she told herself it had. But the wet rattle in his breath, that terrified her more. Hours passed. The faint strip of light under the trap door, which had been a dim gray, began to fade, turning a deep, bruised purple, and then, finally, to black. Dusk had fallen. Sundown. Clara's heart, which had been a dull, slow ache of dread, began to hammer against her ribs. A frantic bird in a small cage. She listened. Above them, the world was silent. The wind had died down. There was no shouting, no hoofbeats. "Eli," she whispered, her voice a dry crackle. "Eli, wake up." She shook his shoulder. He groaned, a long, low sound of misery. They did not come," she whispered, a wild, desperate hope rising in her. Maybe they left. Maybe they saw Lefebvre was dead and they— "Shh," he gasped. His voice was a dry rattle, thin as paper. He was listening. She held her breath, straining her ears. Then she heard it. A faint scrape. Not a boot on the porch, a boot on the side of the house. A low murmur of voices. They had not ridden up in a thunder of hooves. They had returned on foot, quiet as predators. They were surrounding the house. "No," Clara breathed, the hope dying instantly. "Clara?" Eli's voice was suddenly, terribly, clear. He was awake. He was here. He must have been hoarding his last bit of strength. "I am here," she sobbed, clutching his hand. "Listen to me. There is no time." He coughed, a terrible wet sound that racked his whole body. He spat something onto the dirt floor. "Against the back wall. The one facing the river. Feel for the loose stones." "What, Eli? What are you—" "Just do it," he commanded, his voice a harsh whisper. She scrambled on her hands and knees in the dark, her hands brushing the cold, damp earth of the back wall. The cellar was not boarded. It was just a hole dug into the ground. Her fingers hit stone, a low, crumbling retaining wall. "Here," she said. "I feel them. One of them is loose. It was an old root tunnel, to keep the vegetables from freezing. Goes toward the riverbank. It is collapsed, mostly, but a man, or someone small, might crawl through. Mason, he must not have known, or he did not care." She felt along the stones, pushing. One gave way, scraping against the dirt. A blast of cold, clean air, smelling of pine and the coming rain, hit her face. Behind it was a black hole, barely wide enough for her shoulders. "Go!" he gasped. She froze. She turned back in the dark, her heart stopping. "What?" "Go, now! Crawl through. It will come out in the gully by the river. They will not see you. Run, Clara, run and do not stop." She crawled back to him, her hands finding his chest. No, Eli, I am not leaving you. I told you, I am not leaving you." "Do not be a fool," he breathed, his hand gripping her wrist with a sudden, painful strength. I am done. That shot, it went clean through. I am bleeding on the inside. I can feel it. I am not walking out of this town." "Do not say that," she cried, her voice cracking. "You are not. We will wait. We will wait until they leave. Then I will get the doctor." "They are not leaving. Clara, they are here to burn us out." He was coughing again, weaker this time. "Go, let me die knowing. You are safe. That is all I want. Please." She was sobbing, pressing her face against his cold, damp shirt. I cannot go without you. You said we would go north. You promised. Oregon. A man and his wife. You promised." "I know," he whispered. His fingers found her hair, his touch surprisingly gentle. Stubborn woman. You were always so stubborn." She looked up, though she could see nothing but a vague shape in the dark. "And you are a brave man, Eli Ward. You are the bravest man I have ever known, and I will not leave a brave man to die alone in the dark." "Clara." "No, I am staying. They will come, and I will stay. We will go together." A heavy, booted foot kicked the trapdoor above them. The wood groaned. "Widow," Boone's voice, hard and clear in the night air. "We know you are in there, and your drifter, too. We saw him go down." Eli pushed himself up onto one elbow, his breath hissing between his teeth. "Clara, the gun, my revolver. Did you—" "I have it," she whispered. She had picked it up. She had tucked it into the waistband of her skirt, the cold steel pressing against her skin. "Good," he gasped. "Take it. In the tunnel. If they find you—" "Widow!" Boone's shout was louder, right above the door. "You have got 10 seconds to open this cellar, or we are lighting the fire." "Eli!" Clara pleaded, her voice breaking. "You will not stay," he said, and with his last, fading strength, he did not argue. He pushed her, he shoved her, hard, toward the back wall. "Go! Live! Clara! Live!" She stumbled, falling against the loose stones. She looked back, but he was just a shadow, slumping back to the floor. "Live!" A crash, above them. Not the cellar door. It was the front door. They had kicked it in. "She ain't coming up!" another man shouted. "Then fire it," Boone said, his voice cold. "Burn them both." Clara heard a new sound, a sloshing, liquid sound. Kerosene. From her lamps. They were pouring it on the floorboards. The smell hit her first, sharp and chemical, filtering through the cracks. "No," she breathed. Then a whoosh, a sound like a giant, angry breath. The floorboards above her head lit up, the cracks in the wood suddenly glowing a bright, terrible orange. Heat! A wave of heat slammed down into the cellar. "Eli!" she screamed. The smoke came next, pouring through the floorboards in thick, gray-black columns. It was acrid, choking. It burned her eyes, her throat. "Clara, the tunnel!" Eli roared, his voice found in a last, desperate surge of adrenaline. But she could not leave him. She scrambled back, choking, blind in the churning smoke. She found him. He was trying to get up. It is too hot," he gasped. The trapdoor above them was glowing. The fire was eating the small room. "We have to go," Clara screamed, pulling at his arm. "The tunnel, you and me, both of us. You can crawl. I will pull you." "I cannot." "You must." Suddenly, the trapdoor was wrenched open. It was not burning yet, just smoking. A blast of heat and toxic air descended. Boone stood silhouetted against a wall of roaring flame. The entire room was an inferno. The night sky, visible through the shattered walls, was red. "Well, now," he coughed, his face dark in the firelight. "There you are." He saw Clara. He did not see Eli, who was still in the shadows, near the back wall. "Come on up, widow," Boone snarled. "We got things to discuss." He motioned with his rifle. Clara froze, her heart stopping. She had the revolver, but it was in her waistband. He was too far away. And he had a rifle. "I said, come up!" He took a step down. Clara scrambled back. "Leave her alone!" Eli's voice, weak from the darkness. Boone laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "So, he is still breathing. Good, he can watch." He lunged, grabbing Clara's arm. His grip was iron. He dragged her, kicking and screaming, up the steps. She stumbled out onto the floor. The heat was unbelievable. It was like standing inside a forge. The skin on her face tightened instantly. The very air was shimmering. Her dress, damp from the cellar, began to steam. "Where is it?" Boone shouted over the roar of the flames. He shook her, his eyes wild. The firelight danced in his one good eye. "I do not know," she screamed. "Liar!" he backhanded her. The blow sent her sprawling into the dirt of the street. He had pulled her clear of the house, which was now fully engulfed. The other riders, 4 of them, sat on their horses, their faces lit by the fire, watching. They were a half circle, blocking any escape. "That was for Lefebvre," Boone spat, standing over her. He grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. "Now, the money. Mason's money. Where is it?" Clara looked at him, her vision swimming. The street was bright as day, lit by her burning home. She could see the faces of the men on their horses. She could see the frightened, pale faces of the townsfolk, peering from behind their curtains, too cowardly to help. She looked at the burning room. Eli was still in that cellar. He was going to be roasted alive. She had nothing left, nothing to lose. He buried it," she choked out, the smoke and her tears making her voice raw. Boone's grip tightened. "What, buried it where?" With his body." She lied. The idea came from nowhere. A sudden, desperate flash. "The robbery. He knew he was shot before he died. He made me sew it into the lining of his suit. The one they buried him in." There was a dead silence, broken only by the crackle and roar of the fire. Boone stared at her, his face slick with sweat, contorted. He was thinking. He was calculating. It was exactly the kind of black-hearted, cynical thing Mason would do, to take his treasure with him, where no one else could have it. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. He began to laugh. It was not a sound of humor. It was a sound of pure, cold malice. "Bury it with his body," he mused. He released her hair, pushing her away. She fell hard. "Well, now," Boone said, turning to his men. "It seems we are going to be digging. I told you I would get it." He looked down at Clara, his smile widening. "Then I'll dig up your past myself." He raised his rifle. He was going to shoot her. She knew it. She had served her purpose. "Boone." The voice was not a shout. It was a roar of pure, inhuman agony and rage. Boone spun around. Eli stood in the doorway of the burning house. He was not a man. He was a specter, an avenger from the heart of the fire. He was framed by roaring orange flames. His clothes were smoking. His hair was singed. His face was a mask of soot and blood. He was holding his revolver in both hands, his arms steady. Boone was surprised. That second of surprise was all Eli had. Boone tried to bring his rifle up. He was too slow. Eli fired. The bang was flat, almost lost in the roar of the fire. Boone stood for a second, his mouth open. The smile was still on his face. Then a dark, perfectly round hole appeared in the center of his chest. He looked down, confused. He looked up at Eli. He fell, face first, into the mud. He did not move again. Eli remained standing, framed in the fire, his gun still raised. The other riders stared. They had seen their leader, a man they feared, shot dead by a man who should have been dead, a man who had walked out of an inferno. One of them, his nerve breaking, yelled. He yanked his horse's head around and spurred it, hard, into the darkness. He is a ghost!" another shouted. The panic was immediate. The other 3 turned and fled, galloping madly down the dark street, scattering into the night. They did not look back. The night was suddenly, profoundly quiet. There was only the sound of the fire. Eli stood for one more second. Then, his strength, his will, his very life evaporated. The revolver fell from his fingers. He swayed. He collapsed, falling forward, out of the fire, landing in the mud and ashes, just feet from where Clara lay. "Eli!" She screamed his name, She scrambled, crawling on her hands and knees. To his side, she rolled him over. His eyes were open. He was looking at her. His face was calm. The mask of soot could not hide the peace there. You came," she sobbed, pulling his head into her lap, brushing the singed hair from his forehead. You saved me." "Told you," he whispered. His voice was barely a breath. Stubborn. The first drop of rain hit her cheek. It was cold. Then another, and another. The storm, the one that had been threatening for 2 days, finally broke. A deluge. The sky opened. Rain came down in cold, hard sheets, hissing as it struck the burning ruins of her home. The fire, which had been a roaring inferno, began to sputter, to fight back, and then to die, one piece at a time. Great plumes of steam rose, smelling of wet ash and death. Clara did not feel the cold. She did not feel the rain. She only held him, rocking back and forth in the mud, her tears mixing with the storm. "Do not go," she pleaded. "Eli, please, stay. You promised. You stayed the night. You have to stay forever. You promised." He looked up at her. He seemed to be looking through her, past her, at the dark, rain-filled sky. He raised a hand, his fingers trembling, and touched her cheek. He smeared the soot and mud on her skin. "Clara," he whispered. He smiled. It was a faint, gentle, peaceful smile. "Now, you are free." His hand fell. His eyes, still open, went vacant. The shallow, rattling breath stopped. "Eli." She shook him, gently. "Eli." There was no answer, only the sound of the rain, drumming on the ashes, on the mud, on the body of Boone, on the man in her lap. "No," she whispered. It was a sound of disbelief, of denial. "No, no, you cannot leave me. Eli, wake up, please, wake up." She bent over him, her body convulsing with sobs, a high, keening wail of pure, animal grief, a sound ripped from the deepest part of her. She clutched him, pressing her face to his still warm chest, screaming his name into the rain, begging him to come back. He did not move. She did not know how long she sat there. The rain lessened, softened, and finally stopped. The fire was completely out, a black, steaming pile of charred wood. The town remained silent. No one came. No one offered help. No one dared. She held him through the long, cold, wet hours. She held him as the last of his warmth faded, as his body grew stiff in her arms. She did not cry anymore. The sobs had emptied her, leaving her hollow, a shell. Slowly, the black sky turned to a deep, dark purple, then to a cold, sick gray. Dawn found her sitting in the ashes. The world was silent, draped in mist. She was covered in mud, soot, and his blood. She was still holding him. She gently, tenderly, laid his head down in the mud. Her body ached, a deep, frozen pain. She saw something, half buried in the slurry of ash and water near his body. His hat, the one he had worn into her room that first night, covered in snow. It was wet, crushed, stained. She picked it up. She held it in her lap. She sat, her back straight, in the ruins of her life, and watched the gray, empty light of morning spill over the dead, silent town. Weeks later, the world returned. It returned not with a rush, but with the cold, hard finality of a spade striking frozen earth. Clara had not spoken since the dawn. She had not wept. She had sat in the mud and ash until Marshall Coffey had come, his face gray in the morning light. He had looked at the devastation, the smoking ruin, the body of Boone in the street, the body of Lefebvre in the cellar, and the body of Eli Ward, peaceful in the mud. He had looked at Clara, a creature of soot and grief, clutching a man's hat. Silas, the saloon keeper, had been the one to finally make her move. He had brought a blanket and wrapped it around her, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Come, child," he had murmured, and led her, stumbling, to a small, windowless storage room behind the saloon. She had lived in that darkness for weeks. It was a gray, timeless fog. She sat on a cot surrounded by barrels and sacks, and she held Eli's hat. She was a stone. She did not eat. She did not sleep. She just existed, breathing in the smell of stale whiskey and dust. The town, terrified and alive, had to clean up the mess. They dragged Boone and Lefebvre to a ditch outside of town and covered them with dirt. They were bandits. They deserved no more. But Eli Ward was a problem. He was not a bandit. He was not a townsman. He was, as Reverend Pike declared, a complication. On a cold, windless Tuesday, they buried him. Clara heard the church bell, not for him, but for the regular service. The sound pierced her fog. She stood, her legs weak, and for the first time she walked out of the dark room. The daylight was a physical blow. It was thin, white, and cruel. She was a specter in a ruined dress, her hair matted, his hat still clutched in her hands. The townsfolk, gathering for the service, saw her. They stopped, they stared, they parted, like water around a rock, letting her pass. She walked to the churchyard. They were already there. Reverend Pike, his Bible held like a shield. Marshal Coffey, his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable, and two men from the livery leaning on their shovels. The grave was not inside the white picket fence. It was outside, in the tall, dead grass, pressed up against the boundary, as if he were a dog begging for scraps. "We cannot, in good conscience, lay an unknown drifter, a man of documented violence, within this sacred ground," Reverend Pike was saying, his voice carrying on the thin air. He was speaking to the town, to his flock, who watched from a safe distance. "This ground is for the faithful, for the families who built this community." "He died protecting one of this community," Marshal Coffey said, his voice a low growl. "He died as he lived," Pike retorted, his face pinched. "By the gun! He brought the very violence that consumed him. We commit his body to the earth, but we will not bless his presence among our own." Clara stood by the road. She did not approach. She did not cry. She watched, a silent, unmoving witness. The two men lowered the plane, cheap pine box, into the shallow hole. It looked too small. She watched them shovel the frozen, clumpy earth. The sound was a dull, rhythmic thud. 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 It was the sound of the end of the world. When they were finished, it was just a mound of raw, brown earth, a scar on the land. Reverend Pike said a short, cold prayer. His eyes turned toward heaven, refusing to look at the grave. Then he and the townsfolk dispersed, hurrying back to the warmth of the church, leaving her alone with the wind. She stayed until the sun bled red into the west, and the gray cold crept into her bones. He was outside. He was alone. They had cast him out, even in death. She returned to the grave the next day. The fog in her mind had been replaced by something new, a cold, quiet, diamond-hard clarity. It was an anger so deep and pure it felt like strength. She went to the ruin of her home. The charred beams looked like the ribs of a dead animal. She walked through the ash, her boots sinking. She found what she was looking for, two long, half-burned pieces of the doorframe, the frame he had bolted against the world. She carried them, one by one, back to her dark room. She took the skinning knife Eli had given her. It was still tucked in her waistband, a cold line of steel against her skin. She sat on the cot, and she began to work. For 3 days, she carved, her hands, calloused from sewing but soft from disuse, cramped. She cut herself, but she did not feel it. She whittled away the black, charred wood, revealing the clean, pale pine underneath. She worked until she had 2 smooth, simple pieces, one long, one short. She lashed them together with the last of her black thread, the spool from her satchel, the one she had packed for their escape. She wrapped it tight, over and over, until the cross was solid. Then she took her sewing box from the satchel. She chose her strongest needle, a thick one used for canvas. She took the cross to the grave. The day was bright and cold. She sat on the ground, the dead grass crackling under her. She began to carve his name. She did not have the strength to cut the letters, so she punched them. She held the needle like a tiny dagger and, using a smooth rock, she tapped it into the wood. Tap, tap, tap. 1,000 tiny, pinprick holes. It was the only way she knew. Her needle, her only tool, her only skill. It had fixed the wedding dresses of strangers. Now it would build a monument. She saw his face, the way his eyes had softened in the firelight. W-A-R-D. She heard his voice, a low rumble. I stood where I should. It took all afternoon. The sun was low when she finished. Her fingers were raw, the needle slick. The letters were small and rough, but they were there. They were permanent. She used the rock to hammer the pointed end of the cross into the hard earth at the head of the grave. It stood a little crooked, its shadow falling long. It was a defiant, lonely shape. She had marked him. He was not a nameless drifter. He was Eli Ward. She went back to the saloon. Silas was there, wiping down the long bar. The saloon was empty. I am leaving, she said. Her voice, unused for so long, was a dry, broken croak. Silas stopped wiping. He looked at her. He saw the woman who had walked out of the fog. Her eyes were not empty. They were cold and clear. Where will you go, Clara? North, she said. To the mountains? We were going north. Silas nodded slowly. He looked down at the bar. Reckon there is nothing for you here, this town. It failed you. I have no money. It burned. No, Silas said. He reached under the counter and brought up a small, familiar leather pouch. It was heavy with coins. Marshall Coffey found this. In his pocket. He gave it to me. Figured it belonged to you now. She stared at it. Eli's money. The money for their stake. The money to get them to Oregon. Her hand trembled as she took it. It was still warm from being near the stove. Thank you, Silas, for the room. Get on, child, he said, turning his back to her, wiping a glass that was already clean. Do not look back. Just find your peace. She did not buy a horse. She bought a mule, a short, stocky, stubborn creature with wise eyes. She bought flour, coffee, beans, a heavy wool blanket, a new skillet, and 2 boxes of cartridges for the revolver. She had taken it from the cellar. It was clean, oiled, and loaded. It and the knife and the hat were all she had of him. She left before dawn. She packed the mule in the freezing, dark alley. She strapped her small satchel, her sewing box, and the new supplies. She put his hat on her head. It was too big. It fell low, shadowing her face, but it felt right. It felt like a shield. She led the mule down the single, silent street. The town was asleep. The windows were all dark. She did not look at the black, skeletal ruin of her home. She did not look at the general store. She passed the church. She stopped. She looked at the graveyard, dark and still. She could just make out the shape of the small, crooked cross, standing alone outside the fence. I am going, Eli, she whispered to the wind. I am going north, for both of us. She got on the mule, and she rode west, toward the high, dark line of the mountains. She did not look back. The trail was hard. The plains gave way to rolling foothills, then to steep, rocky ascents. The air grew thin and bit at her lungs. She rode for weeks, following a cold, fast river, pushing deeper into the wilderness. She saw no one. The world was just the cry of the wind, the green-black of the pines, and the gray of the rock. She learned the silence. She learned the cold. She learned the weight of the revolver on her hip. The loneliness was a vast, clean thing. It was not the shrinking, fearful loneliness of her room in the town. It was an ache, but it was a strong ache. It was the space he had left, a space she'd now had to grow to fill. One day, while riding through a high pass, the wind moaned, a high, thin sound. She found herself humming. It was a simple tune, a little melody that went up and down, with no real end, a tune a man might whistle while he worked. She stopped, her hands cold on the reins. He had whistled that. On their last morning, he had been checking his gun, and he had whistled that tune, low and soft. She had not known she remembered it. She sat on the mule, high in the empty mountains, and she hummed his song. A tear, the first one since she had woken in the mud, traced a hot, clean path down her wind-chapped cheek. She let it fall. She found the cabin a month later, deep in a valley carved by the river. It was an old trapper's cabin, half ruined. The roof caved in on one side, but the stone hearth was solid. It was sheltered by tall pines, and it was the first place that felt like it was not trying to kill her. It was a place to stop. She worked. She used the knife and her own 2 hands. She repaired the roof with pine boughs and mud. She chinked the logs. She built a door from salvaged planks. She mended her new home, just as she had mended the dresses of others. It was a hard life, but it was hers. Travelers used the river path, miners, mostly, and trappers. The first one, an old man with a beard to his chest, saw her smoke. He had a shirt ripped clean in 2. He offered her a half bag of flour to mend it. She mended it. Her fingers were stiff, but the skill was there. It was her trade. Word spread, slowly, up and down the river. There was a woman in the high valley, a seamstress. She did not talk, but her work was strong. They came. They brought her canvas tents to patch, buckskin shirts to sew. In return, they left her coffee, salt, beans, jerky. She earned her life, 1 stitch at a time. She spoke little. She kept her eyes on her work. They learned not to ask her questions, but they saw things. They saw the man's hat she wore when she chopped wood. They saw that she was alone, but she was not afraid. And they saw the lantern, every night, without fail. As dusk fell, she lit a single lantern and placed it in the small window that faced the trail. It burned all night, a tiny, steady, yellow flame. The men gathered around their own campfires miles down the river, talked. They did not understand her. A lone woman, the lantern, the silence. They created a story. They said she was waiting. They called her the ghost bride. They said her man had gone into the mountains to find gold and never returned, and she kept the light for him. They said she was a phantom, a woman trapped by a grief so deep it had turned her to shadow. Clara heard the rumors. A young, nervous prospector had called her that. Ghost bride, his voice full of awe. She had just looked at him, her needle poised. I am a seamstress. Do you have mending? The name, however, did not bother her. She was a ghost, in a way. The woman who had been Clara Jennings had died in the fire, and she was a bride, not Mason's, his, in those last hours. She had been his, and he had been hers. Her dreams were her own. She never dreamed of the fire. She never dreamed of Boone. She never dreamed of the grave. She dreamed of him. It was always the same. The lamp is low. The wind is howling outside the small room. She is afraid. And Eli is there. He is closing the door, slowly, shutting out the storm. He shoots the bolt. The sound is loud, final, safe. He turns to her, his face soft in the firelight, and he opens his arms. She woke one night, the dream so real she could still smell the wood smoke. The cabin was dark and cold. She rose from her cot and went to the window. It was snowing. A deep, profound snow, falling in thick, soft, silent waves. It was burying the valley. It was the same snow, the snow that had brought him. Her lantern was on the sill, its small flame a stubborn gold against the vast, endless white. She was not waiting. She was not a ghost. She knew he was not coming back. She was a witness. She looked out at the snow, at the night, and she whispered to the wind, her breath a small white cloud. "You stayed. Eli, you always stayed." A single candle burned in the cabin window, a tiny, defiant light in the deep wilderness, as the snow fell, soft and endless. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment where you are listening from to connect with others. Subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts in English.